King James? What is the verse? I'm interested in that phrase, the first day, the verse 5. I mean, Genesis 1:5.
Evening and morning, the first day.
Okay. The first day.
New King James,
Okay.
and it says, verse 5, it says, God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day.
Okay, so the first day. So far, everything's the King James, the New King James, the English Standard Version are all the first day. Okay, so here's the problem. In the Hebrew, it doesn't say the first day, it says day 1.
Getting back to the question from Pastor, there was something out there before day 1.
Or there was something,
Scriptures here.
right, or there was something that he created and then he began working on into day 1. Okay, so.
What the formula was, but there was something out there, I believe.
Yeah, there was something there, but I wouldn't say that there was a gap of ages or time. I don't see verse 2 as being chaos, or that there's a long period of time.
NASB says 1 day.
It says 1 day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Day 1 day.
That's
really close.
NASB's close. NASB has 1 day. All right. Verse 6, then he says, let there be an expanse, a separation in the midst of the waters. So there's water on the earth, there's water vapor above the earth, and there's atmosphere in between. Okay, that's what the word expanse is. I forget what the old King James was on that one. I think they had a different word. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under from the expanse of the waters that were above. So this is the creation of atmosphere.
Firmament.
Firmament, thank you. That's a word we don't use anymore today. So not too many people know what it meant. And it was so, and God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, day 2. Okay, so day 2, the second day. So when we say the first day, the second day, this is where people are like, well, you know, it's just a figure of speech. Well, it isn't. Whoever wrote, of course, Moses wrote the final version of Genesis 1, but whoever wrote Genesis 1 was counting. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. There's really no linguistic way, there's no way to look at the language and say, these are long periods of time. They are days. They aren't long days, like, well, a day just means a long period of time. They are 24 hours because it says evening and morning, and it tells us that on day 1. So on day 1, it's established for us what we're talking about. We're talking about 24 hours. And then we're counted out 6 days, and when we get to the end, or chapter 2, we get to the 7th day. So there are these are actual days. Now, how do we know that? Okay, so here's the question. We bring it back to Hebrews 11. How do we know that God created the earth in 6 days? We weren't there. Who was there? God was there. And who told us what God did? God told us. He told us what he did in 6 days. So by faith, it's not just that we understand he created the world through this long evolutionary process, but by the very word of his power, he stated it into existence, and he was there. The only way we can accept that is by faith. I can't prove to you, empirically, that God created the world in 6 days. Now, all the evidence around me will support the fact that God created the world in 6 days, and there was a worldwide flood. We have to throw that in there. And this is what I like about Ken Ham. And I think I mentioned this before in Sunday school class at some point. But when Ken Ham had the debates with Bill Nye over whether the earth was young or old, And Bill Nye, of course, wasn't a science, he's not a science guy, but they had their debate. One of the things that Ken Ham did in the Answers in Genesis magazine after the first debate is he had an article in there, and in there was like a little illustration. And it was Ken Ham and Bill Nye both looking at the side of the Grand Canyon. They both have the same physical evidence to examine. They both have eyes, ears, nose, mouth, tongues, if you want to lick the side of a mountain, I guess. But they have all the same scientific instruments. All the physical evidence is exactly the same, but the interpretation is vastly different. Why is the interpretation vastly different? Ken Ham pointed out that it's your worldview that you're starting from. It's the perspective where you're coming from, and Ken Ham is coming from a perspective of faith. I take this by faith, that God did this because I believe what God said was true. I believe what God said is true. Of course, and then Bill Nye does not believe that what God said, one, that God said it, or two, that what he says is true. And it's that difference in worldview that it makes all the difference in our lives. And as we look at this chapter on faith, this is kind of that theme of why the author put it here. We'll look at that more next week, but our lives lived by faith in the permanent things, in the things that are unseen, not in this world, because this world is temporary. And for us to properly understand this world, we have to come at it by trusting God's word. Otherwise, we will be led astray. So this gets us into Hebrews 11. That was a little side rail there for creation, that verse 3. And next week, Lord willing, we'll finish Hebrews 11. We'll talk a little bit more about verse 6. Because it's kind of the key verse of this chapter. But any other questions? Like I said, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on that.
I did see something on Facebook last week, and that's pretty exciting.
Oh.
The little boy said to his dad, "Daddy, you lied to me. Said, you told me that God created everything and created man in his own image." He said, "I just asked Mom. Mom said that we evolved from a monkey." And Dad said, "I did not lie to you. That's your mom's talking about her side of the family."
I don't need to repeat that for the sake of the recording.
I was looking at the Schofield little note here, and seeing something I really haven't thought about, I guess, too much before, probably. When I think about creation, I think of it like 24-hour days too, I guess. I get pretty simple. Anyway, he said the use of evening and morning may be held to limit day to the solar day, but the frequent parabolic use of natural phenomena may warrant the conclusion that it simply means that each created day was a period of time marked off by the beginning and ending. In any event, the sun did not become a measure of time before the fourth day, as seen in verses 14 to 18.
Yeah, so even Schofield's notes seem to indicate that morning and evening, the word day in Genesis 1, we need to think about it more. Now, his original notes were written in 1911, I believe, or 1900 something, and then they were revised once. But this is something that the Christians in that period, 1870 to 1920, were really struggling with. By 1920, the divide was made between the two, but yeah. So even Schofield's notes.
After the flood, the world could change really a lot.
Yeah, so we always have to take into account a worldwide flood, because that did change everything. That changed the landscape of the earth, and that That's one of those difficulties for scientists to this day. So the whole global warming, global climate change thing is part of that debate, because the people who look at global warming as a problem have a serious problem in history. And that is, we have all of these animals, and we're finding more of them because of the global warming, that were frozen in time. We have the contents of their stomachs were preserved because they were frozen so fast. These tropical animals eating tropical food in northern Siberia. Now, if you know anything about northern Siberia, it's very cold. It's a tundra. It's frozen. The ground is frozen. There is no... So how did they get there? How did the food get there? How did the animals get there? How did they get frozen? It had to be by catastrophe. Okay, there had to be a catastrophe. But all the global change, the global warming data is only based on, 150 years worth of data, but it assumes uniformitarianism for the last 400 million years. Okay, as if we had thermometers on the face of the earth 400 million years ago, but you go to the Science Museum and they'll show you. And the question there is, okay, which was it? Has it been uniform or was it catastrophe? You can't have both. And if you have catastrophe, it actually undermines all of the global warming craze completely. But that's neither here nor there. All right. Well, the ladies are out, so we're well over time. So Randy, would you like to close us in prayer again today?
Father, thank you for this opportunity this morning to gather together for one another. Thank you for the bond of grace. Lord, even for this time now in Sunday school hour, as we talk about creation, Lord, just help us to know and realize and have confidence in the fact that you did create. Lord, may that just lead and guide us through all things in life. Again, we just ask you bless